there's so much that Jesus is laying out for them here that I'm just struck by, their little discussion amongst themselves. And of course they get quiet because they know it's really not a good discussion to be having. In essence, which one of us is the greatest? Well, I guess you could assume they were adding other people to the discussion, but I doubt it. And it's interesting because when we do that, there's nothing wrong with it in and of itself, unless, of course, it's just, selfish. Who's the greatest? I am. But because we do it too, right? I mean, we may talk about who's the greatest football player. As a musician, sometimes people say, who's the greatest guitar? Who do you think is the greatest guitar player? Insert the thing. And what's fun about it is what it really reveals is what our priorities are, right? And so for them, whatever answers they were coming up with, Peter, because, well, Jesus called him the rock, It should be Matthew. He's good with money, and we're going to need someone to keep track of all this. Whatever, they're revealing their priorities. That's what they're really doing. And if they say me, then their priority is me. It's pretty simple. And so Jesus, rather than, this is often the case that, okay, they get quiet, and he's like, let me just teach in this moment. And he brings a kid, and puts his arms around this child, right? And I love that it says it. Well, gender pronouns a little different in Greek, but that it doesn't matter whether it's a boy or a girl, but he puts his arms around this child to say, this is my priority. And sorry for young people in the room, he doesn't necessarily mean directly just children to the detriment of others. His point really is around what children represent, and that is, in a word, vulnerability. Children represent vulnerability. And that always reminds me of something Brene Brown once said that I hate. I hate that she said this because it's true and I don't like it. And that's what we do with truth we don't like, right? And she said, vulnerability has nothing to do with winning or losing. It has to do with having the courage to show up when you can't control the outcome. I'm going to say it again, but I want everyone to focus on the cross for a second. Vulnerability has nothing to do with winning or losing. It has to do with having the courage to show up when you can't control the outcome. Just as I told the little ones here before, stand up tall, stick out your chest, this is your gospel. Well, it's ours too, but I don't know that it makes us want to stand up tall and stick out our chest because it's going to ask something pretty major of us. And that is to show up and not try to control the outcome. Well, first of all, admit that we often can't control the outcome. That's just part of how it works, right? His whole life ends up testifying to that. It's not just something he says in the end. And I don't know about you, but I can intellectually assent to that really easily. Yep, that's it, vulnerability. I get it, right? And it's not just the cross. Again, he could have saved us any way he wanted. It didn't have to be the cross. He could have done anything he wanted up to and including the old I Dream of Jeannie. There you go. Right? No joke. I mean, it's kind of a funny joke. Kids, you're missing a great TV show. Check it out. But God could have done that. Would have been much more efficient. What's with this being born and then waiting 30 years to get to the teaching and then 3 years on the teaching only to lead to this bloody death? Well, if that's the only lens we're looking through, then yeah, that's a messed up story. It's a really messed up story. But before the cross is expiation of sin, long before the cross is expiation of sin, it's an act of love, and it's teaching us about vulnerability. Literally stripped naked, wide open, in front of all, shamed by world standards. And that becomes the moment of our salvation. And I gotta think for the apostles, so many of these kinds of stories were just flipping through their head as he's doing this, right? Because here he just gave a little foreshadowing of it. Foreshadowing, he literally said it. They're gonna kill me. And of course, they're so freaked out, they don't even know what that means, and they're afraid to ask. But as it all starts to come together, and then of course, the tension of the moment of his death, and then the resurrection, and then he appears to them, and then the ascension, the whole Paschal mystery, all in one unit. asking us to say, can we be vulnerable? Will we show up where we know we can't control the outcome? Will we be the servant of all? Because when you serve, you're going to have to be vulnerable. And you risk rejection and misunderstanding, and you might get hurt. But that's the guy we're following. A lot of people want to make the faith about worship. And that is important. It's part of what brings us here this morning, right? Is to worship God for God's goodness to us. But do notice that Jesus never once asks to be worshiped. What he asks us to do is follow him. That is far more difficult. Because if we'll risk the vulnerability, we will have a deeper connection with God, with others, and with ourselves. And there's no shortcut for that. It's not an intellectual assent. The greatest distance on earth is between our head and our heart. I got an A in this class in my theology degree, but it doesn't make it easier to live when the moment presents itself for me to be vulnerable to family, to friends, in my work, within our church, within our country, within our culture. It doesn't make it easier. But the only thing that will make it easier is the practice of it, is the stepping closer to God step by step. And even when we stumble, that we pick ourselves up and see the love of God going, you've tasted it, right? You've tasted it. You know that this is what leads to a deeper connection. Otherwise, what we're talking about is do good things, avoid bad things, and come to the meeting once a week. And I always say that's the Kiwanis Club and the Rotary and Boy Scouts. Wonderful organizations, but God did not come to earth to start an organization. He came that all would know his love and the light of God. He came that we would have our joy and have it to the full, as he says in John's Gospel. But then that's on us. That's our work to do. He allowed himself to be broken. He allowed his blood to be poured out so that in this Eucharist, our mystical participation in the Paschal mystery will strengthen us to do that. Because I don't know about you, otherwise I won't. I'll just stay where I'm at because it's easier, it's safer, it's comfortable. But to the extent I ventured off of that safety square, I've tasted it and I know it. I know that's what leads to deeper connection. To God first, but then to others too. We know this in other relationships. And so we prepare ourselves for this Eucharist to acknowledge that what happens in this sacrifice is him being broken beautifully. Think of that. Those two words shouldn't go together, should they? To be broken beautifully? Oh, we sing it. We have that opportunity to acknowledge that what the gift he's going to give to us this morning is his very presence to strengthen us to be a little bit more vulnerable in our relationships, to not count the cost of discipleship, to love and to serve, to see what little children represent, both in their innocence and in their ability to go. I often go places where I don't control the outcome, right? That's what kids do. Come on, we're going. Okay, I guess we're going. And then you hear Jesus saying to Peter post-resurrection, when you were young, you went where you wanted, but there'll come a day, remember this? Where people will take you where you do not want to go. That's a little scary to all of us, I think. But in this Eucharist, he strengthens us to be a little bit more vulnerable, a little bit more Christ-like. Let's pray for the courage as we come forward for this Eucharist to say, Lord, give me the courage and the strength to be a little bit more vulnerable. But be careful what you pray for, because you will get it. We will get it. May God be praised.